Hello, I'm William Godwin, 1st District Councilman and Vice President of the Gary Common Council. Today I'm happy to be joined by and have an interview with our Calumet Township Assessor, Ms. Jacqueline Collins. We're also joined by Mr. Ed Golson, the Chief Deputy of the Calumet Township Assessor Office. So we got a lot of questions about your assessed value when you got the bills a few weeks ago, so I thought it would be great. And Assessor Collins was kind enough to make herself available to do an interview with us today. So let's just start. We have all these different government titles, elected positions. What is a township assessor and how is that different? How does that work with the county assessor?
Well, a township assessor is just what it says, the assessor for that township. Prior to 2008, I believe it was, there were 1,008 township assessors. There were so many were eliminated based on the size. I think it was anything 15,000 parcels and under were eliminated completely because we were going to smaller government. Anything over that, there was a referendum. And during that referendum, in Lake County alone, there were 4 or 5 townships that decided to keep their elected official because it's more hands-on. It's people in the community that you know. In Lake County, we have myself, the Calumet Township Assessor. You have Ross Township, St. John, Hobart, and Center. So we have 5 within Lake County. And we have the most township assessors in our county.
Interesting. And so you work with the assessors, so how is your job different than the county assessor?
Well, I am responsible for the parcels within Calumet Township, and that includes, we have 5 taxing districts in Calumet, 6 in Calumet Township, which is inclusive of Griffith. Okay, and they go by unit numbers, so 001 is unincorporated Calumet Township, 002 is the Gary Sanitary District, then you have 003, which is, I'll just do a blank here. Oh, the Black Oak area of Gary, I'm sorry. And then 004, which is Gary. The 005 is Lake Station Gary, and 006 is Griffith. Now, some people think that parts of Gary, because we're sort of divided but together, you have Miller, Glen Ryan, Etna in the Miller area, what we call Miller proper. Then you have Gary that we call Gary proper, but you have a lot of little subdivisions that within those, in that unit, within 004. But everybody thinks of their their community, so to speak. Yeah.
Interesting. So when you are calculating the assessed value, what's the process for that? How often does that happen for a particular taxing unit? And what are some of the criteria that are used when there's an increase in the property value?
Let's see, it's not so much as an increase in the value because sometimes the value goes down. But I'll start with one. First, we do what we call a cyclical reassessment, and that's 1/4 of the parcels within the jurisdiction every year. It used to be where you did the whole township every 4 years, but now it's 1/4 every year. And we have what we call a model, and the model is within our regulation. Everything we do is guided by the Department of Local Government and Finance. So we have a model, which is a cost model. It's based on cost, but it is trended, so as to speak, with a market factor. You apply that factor to bring it up to market value in use. There are a couple factors. As a matter of fact, you can have a location cost multiplier, which for Lake County and Porter County is much higher than the rest of the state because it's based off Indianapolis cost for builders. And since we're closer to the Chicago market, we get a little higher cost multiplier, and then the neighborhood or the market factor is based on the sales for any particular area.
So one question I got was, I'd love to know on what basis my home value and taxes were increased so much in a single year. This person says her home's assessed value increased by 281%.
I found that interesting, and I went back and I ran a report. I didn't find any homes that increased by that percentage. Sometimes there are mistakes made. Sometimes we've had where some homes may not have been, we call picked up, or they may have had, if it's a new home, we go out and we may put a % complete on that home, and we may not get back to it to remove it, and they might have been living in the house for 3 or 4 years before we realized, hey, that % complete was not put to 100%. Or it could be.
And when you say % complete, you're talking about in terms of
building
the construction.
Yeah, construction, absolutely.
Okay.
When you build a home, it's whatever's on the land as of January 1st.
Mm-hmm.
So if we go out there and you only have so much of it, we have a guide, and so let's say we have it at 20 or 30%. And sometimes, even though we may flag it, sometimes we may not get back to it for whatever reason. That could be a problem. Sometimes you have homes that may be in need of repair, and we may give it obsolescence while it's being rehabilitated,
mm-hmm.
and that may not come off in a timely manner. And then sometimes it can just be the fact that it was under assessed.
Mm-hmm.
And what I try to tell people to look at your home, the same value that you place on it when it's on the market for sale, that's how close we should be when it's being assessed. But people look at things differently.
Right.
When you're talking about taxes, I want it this low. When we're talking about on the market, I want it up here.
Right.
So, but they should actually be as close to as even as possible.
So how close is it? I've heard some folks say that there shouldn't be price chasing, but I know there is a delay, right? So for example, I obviously know in my other life that there have been a lot of high price sales in Miller and in even other areas throughout the city.
Mm-hmm.
And when we look at that and we look at the assessed value, I could see a property that sells for $500,000, but the assessed value might be $250 or $275. So at some point, it's going to catch up with those market sales. Now, every time there is a sale, there's a report, I think, that's filed. Is it with your office?
It's filed.
Sales disclosure.
Sales disclosure.
It's filed
right.
with the county assessor.
It's filed with the county
Mm-hmm.
assessor. So
Yes.
you all obviously have access.
We get a copy of it, yes.
So how close is it? Because sometimes I know it's drastic, but it does take time.
Generally, what we've noticed, what the trend has been, is that we are under assessed.
Mm-hmm.
The market is here and we're here. And so a lot has to do with, especially in Miller, you have a lot of flips going
Mm-hmm.
on. And that's where people will buy a property that may be in need of remodeling or rehabbing, and they're doing some outstanding work
Right.
in them. And they will go into those homes and will adjust those homes based on the workmanship that's been done to bring it up. Let's say the house was built in 1965, but they've gone in, it's no longer a 1965 house,
Right.
so we bring that effective age up to what it should be, and that will bring about a change in the value, because you can't chase sales.
Right.
You just can't. It's not fair. But what people have to understand is, they say, well, my house didn't sell. We understand that, but your house is in the neighborhood and it's similar to the house that did sell. So we're saying if this house sold for $250,000, your house, which is similar, is worth that too. So the factors apply to all the homes in the neighborhood, not just to the ones that sell.
I see.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Can I say there's also a requirement that we do that.
Mm-hmm.
When we get a sales disclosure, we go out and look at the assessed value as opposed to the sale price to see if in fact it's a valid sale, because it could be you sold the property to a relative, It could be that it's under some kind of trust or some kind of stress situation, and that's why we have it at a higher price than what it is, but it's sold under a stress situation. We have to take a look at all of those things to determine if that is that assessment is in line with a true market value.
Makes sense. Because one question I got was, if they were saying that there's a lot of flipping happening on their street, and while they haven't done anything to their house, why would theirs be, or could theirs be negative? Could they have a higher assessed valuation essentially if someone has done, say, 2, 3, 4 flips on their block or within a couple blocks of them, but they haven't done anything to their house?
Even though they may not have done any improvements to their house, the fact of the matter is the market factor will be applied to all homes in that neighborhood. Now, the home that was flipped is going to have maybe some other adjustments to it, but that factor goes to everything. And I actually printed up we do a ratio study, and I wanted you to see the difference. Now, in this neighborhood, this is what the total sales are here, and this is what the assessment is, and you see the big difference.
Right.
Yeah. So when we look at that, we can tell that most of the homes are under assessed or undervalued compared to the actual sale price.
So when we say neighborhood, so obviously everyone in the first district, pretty much everyone in the city of Gary is in the 004 taxing district.
Everyone in Gary.
Everyone in Gary. But within that district, there's a ton of neighborhoods.
Yes.
Even beyond, like you were saying earlier, Miller, Etna, Glen Ryan, even within these neighborhoods.
Within those divisions, yes, there are there are neighborhoods. I think in residential we have like 100 and...
I think it's 130, 140 different neighborhoods.
It's about 130 plus neighborhoods just in Gary.
Yes.
And that so you get a pretty narrow and detailed analysis of what's happening in the market. Okay, so let me.
I'm sorry. And in Miller, for instance, you have in 2512, I believe it is. That's what we call the lakefront. And 2500 is what we call Lake View. They're not actually on the beach, but they have a pretty good view of it. So that's two different neighborhoods. And so we try to make sure that everyone is treated fairly and equal.
Right.
And I did a little research because I know those people in Miller are very upset about their values. But the land, for yourself in real estate, is location, location, location.
Right.
Well, the land is definitely undervalued in that area. So, right across the border in Ogden Dune on the lake, it's $5,200 a front foot. And I do believe for us it's what, 3,000, 3,500, somewhere along in there. So.
There's always been a disparity between the similar. I worked on a project with the state, and they were looking at the lakefront all around in different communities, but by far, Miller was the lowest of all of them.
I see.
Yeah. So there's some consideration that we're doing some analysis now, doing some work, evaluating some of the land itself.
All right.
Let me ask a question, I think, along those lines. One of the questions was, how much of a premium should those that live on Lakeshore Drive expect to pay? As an example, I pay, this is not me, but from a resident, I pay 3 times more than my neighbor across the street. So I guess that person would maybe have the lake view, but not the lakefront. But the question is, I guess, how much different is it for being on the water versus having a view of the water?
I don't think it's 3 times as much, to be honest. And if I could just interject something, in 2002, I think it was, when the first assessment was performed to bring us to market, it was based on the fact that Mr. Gomostego, who was from Sherville, Dyer, somewhere out south, had petitioned the state about the fact that the older homes in the Miller section, specifically those on the lake, were valued less than new homes that were being built in St. John, I think it was a community if I'm not mistaken, and they were actually worth more on the market. And that's why we switched from the way assessing was done back then, so that we actually are now more market driven. But when I look at neighborhood 2512, which is Lakefront, and neighborhood 2500, which is Lakeview, it's not 3 times.
Okay.
Yeah. Now the home, I'm speaking when I say 3 times, that's not the land.
Right.
It's not.
Right.
The home, it could be the model for the home
Right.
itself. So I can't speak on that, but.
So when you say the process before 2002 and after 2002, can you say more about what was different in terms of how assessment was done?
That would be your specialty there.
Well, back then, reassessments were conducted. They've gone from every 10 years, which was a real burden on taxpayers, that they went to 6 years. And so that was still an additional burden on taxpayers because we didn't make any changes. At that time, it was mostly costs. And you're talking about land values, we're talking about those. Those were done in a group setting, coordinated with the state commissioners. We had people from each of the counties that participated, and there were several realtors, appraisers. There was a large group that set land values, and those land values were maintained for a very long time because they didn't do that very often.
Is that the factor you're talking about that's used, or what do you mean when you say
Actual
land
land
value?
value.
Actual
I
land
see.
values, whether it be 40,000 an acre, 20,000.
I see, for the whole state.
For the whole state,
I see.
everybody worked with the commissioners in their particular areas to come up with these land values, and then they were approved by the state.
I see.
Those were maintained for a long time. You didn't start really seeing land values change again until the early 2000s, and some went high. When you're talking about, I know you're talking about primarily residential, but commercial, there was a large surge in land values for commercial, except for U.S. Steel.
We're going to talk about that later.
Except
We'll
for
talk about that later.
So, but right now we're in the process of, again, since we have a cyclical reassessment, we are allowed to at least recommend land values on a yearly basis that the state can look at and certify depending on what area, what phase we're in. So currently that's what we're doing with land values.
And again, just as a reminder, that's 25% of the taxing district
25 of the township.
of the township
Right.
every 4 years. So every year
Every
you do
year,
25%.
every year we do
So you
it.
cover the whole district,
Township.
township within a 4-year
And
period.
it
Yes.
comes out to
Correct.
be about 17,000 parcels per year.
Oh, wow. So in this past year, this current year of assessment, what do we know what all, obviously I know the first district was covered, and there were other sections of Gary that also were covered, or other parts of the township.
We're consistent with the phases. So phase 1 of the beginning, the first year of every 4 years has been with Miller, and it ends in Griffith
Okay.
in phase 4.
Okay.
So we move from east to west to south.
Perfect. Good to know. Let me ask a couple questions about some of the things that can make your assessed value go up. So one example I've heard is someone had, and I don't think this was even in the first district, but in another part of the city, they had built a shed on their property, and they got their assessment, and according to them, it was very high. So then they were told that if you do an extension to your house, they would have a lower assessed valuation increase than if they have a standalone building on the property. So the person, I'm told, tore down the building and extended their house to accomplish the same goal of having storage. So, I mean, that's just one example I've heard. I don't know the truth of
Well,
it, but
the truth of the matter is, most people don't even build a shed. They
Right.
go out to Menards, Lowe's, or someplace and they buy one.
Right.
And so those are standard pricing. Whatever they pay for it out there is what we put on the property for. So you do have a few people who build nice sheds. There are
Mhm.
some, but more than likely, if you build an addition onto your home, let's say your home was built in 1985. We're gonna make it a newer home.
so your house building.
Okay, so good year then. 1985, you're built on your home.
Mhm.
If you build an addition, that addition, your home is gonna have some depreciation,
Right,
but that addition will not. So,
I see.
yeah, whatever it costs to build it, then that's what the assessment is.
Yeah, on top of the
Right, absolutely. So I don't know who told them that, and one thing I definitely want to make sure people are aware of, that we do make mistakes, and I would not sit here and say that we don't. We're human, we make mistakes, but we found more from neighbors telling on neighbors. Did you know they have a finished basement? Because people want to compare.
Right.
You know, this is my neighbor. Why do they pay less in taxes than I do? And so they'll come in, they'll say, well, they've got a finished basement, they have this, that, or the other. And so that's how we find out a lot of information about property. But everything we do here is public information. If you feel we've made a mistake, you can file an appeal if it's in the given time. And that's, you have 45 days after notice of a change in your property. That's by either the Form 11, which is a notice of assessment, or your tax bill. Either way. And if you just really believe that, hey, you guys have messed up, come in. I'm here, Ed's here, probably 99% of the time, and say, I think you guys messed up. We'll take a look at it.
So they have 45 days after notice.
You have 45 days from the date of your notice to file an appeal.
And you can contact your office.
There's a 130, it's called a 130 appeal notice, and it has to be in writing. You file that here at this office.
And we're at
501 East 5th Avenue, 219-885-0555.
That's easy to remember.
Yeah, because someone said that they called 3 numbers. I'm like, well, where do they call? We only have 1. Yeah, but yeah, and we'll sit down, we'll go over your property. Now, what we found is when people have filed appeals, we've actually hired a fee appraiser to go out, because if we're moving toward market and you file an appeal and if we're confident that we can win, then we're gonna hire an appraiser and see what he comes back at. And most of the time when we do that, the appraised value is higher than we have the assessed value.
So let me ask you this.
I just want to say one thing. Under the 130 appeal, they consolidated it. The state got rid of what we call the 133 appeal, and they eliminated that. But it was incorporated into a section 3 of the 130 appeal, which means it waivers the 45-day limit. So under certain circumstances. So say if you're, say we have your house at 1,000 square feet, and you say, oh no, my house is 500 square feet. That's a change that you can file under a 130 appeal under section 3, and we at any time, 365 days, yes, do that, and we can make those changes.
So when you're making, to make sure I'm clear, when you're making changes about not necessarily
subjective changes
subjective,
are 45 days.
Yes.
Okay.
Okay.
And subjective means what?
Or your opinion.
of what I think this is over assessed.
Yes.
Okay, and
Yeah.
objective, if we know it's not
You
1,000
can look at it
square
and
feet.
tell, right,
Gotcha.
yeah, absolutely.
So objective, you're mainly talking about square footage. Do I have a finished basement?
Construction
Do I
type,
not?
yeah, something
Yes.
like that.
Type of building,
Right,
that type of
yes.
thing. Okay, so the Form 130 is under the 45 days. Make sure I got
But
this right.
it's, the Form 130 now is the 130 and 133 combined.
Gotcha.
Okay, but if you're filing just based on the value, if you're saying, well, and you can't, unless you have an appraisal yourself and can say, well, here I have an appraisal,
Mhm.
so then that's still going to be the 130. But if you come in and say, I don't have a finished basement, that's something we can see.
Mhm.
So therefore, we can do that on the backside of the 130.
Anytime.
Anytime. We can
Under
do that.
section 3, and it gives you information as to what you can file under that section. If you look at section right here,
Okay.
if there's a mathematical error,
Right.
and
The
there's
wrong
something-
person,
Right.
the removal, the approval, denial, or omission of a deduction, credit, exemption, abatement, or tax cap, a clerical, mathematical, or typographical mistake, the description of the property, the legality or constitutionality of a property tax or assessment. So those are some of the things that you can do. So this is Form 130.
Yes,
So there's a subjective and an objective.
absolutely.
Subjective is 45 days.
Yes.
Objective is anytime throughout the year. And I would just ask, given the whole COVID crisis and the government offices have been closed, is there any room for an extension in terms of people's ability to request under the 45-day rule?
Well, I would tell anyone right now to file it. If they think there's an error, file the appeal. They can email it into the office. They can mail it. They can fax it. So because I can't say there's an extension. I know there was an extension on the date to pay
Right.
the taxes, but I don't know about
Appeal.
Right, so
Okay.
I would definitely tell anyone to protect their right to appeal, to go ahead and appeal,
Gotcha.
yes.
Sounds good. Let me ask about, so we talked about the appeals process. We've talked about how often properties are reassessed. Make sure I got all my questions. I don't want to get in trouble here. One question was about a tax deduction being reapplied. So it looks like they had an exemption that fell off. It says it shows as blank on this tax statement. They would like to know how and when they assess the gross assessed value and what and where do they get that information from. So the main question is about when a deduction drops off, which may be an auditor's
That's an
issue.
auditor's, and what we noticed that there was an error on the bills, but the deduction does show up actually on their program.
Okay.
Yeah, so, but they can check, they can call here or call the auditors, we can pull up their parcel number and see. But we did notice that there were some, probably most, for whatever reason, that deductions were dropped
Okay.
off. Yeah, but they are in place.
But they are in place.
Yes.
Okay. And it says how to get information about your neighbor's property taxes, which I believe you can look on the Lake County Treasurer's
The
website, the assessor's website as well.
Yeah, or you can call. We'll
Right.
tell you. It's public information. The only thing that is not public would be regarding the personal property and the sales disclosure, and that's just the telephone numbers on those. But everything else you can call and say, hey, can you tell me what Ed Golson assessment is?
Right.
And what is he being assessed for? And we go through it with you.
Absolutely. Sounds good. So let's look at some of the, I guess, the bigger picture issues. Now we know the tax caps are 1%, 2%, and 3%. Just wanted to talk briefly about that. Could you kind of explain how that works, the caps?
Well, the caps are based on property use. There's a lot of different property classes. The state has identified who can get what cap. For residents, since we're talking about mostly residential, it's 1%.
Mm-hmm.
Apartment building owners, they might be the 2%. Most commercial properties and land are in 3%.
Mm-hmm.
There are some exceptions. Again, it's a lot of them.
Mm-hmm.
But those are the three primary. What that does not allow is that that person has to pay more than that percentage based on the assessed value of a particular property for that year. And so it creates a pool of dollars with the tax cap credit that the cities whom they identify with, well, this whole state of Indiana, can't use as a pool of money.
Mm-hmm.
So that's deducted from the levy amount.
So say more about what the levy amount is.
Okay, well, each district has its own levy amount. The state takes the AV, land value.
So it's
and
the
they-
assessed valuation and the
land value,
Uh-huh.
and they come up with an amount that a city or entity can levy for that particular area.
Mm-hmm.
Right now for Gary, it's like 77 million.
Mm-hmm. So for example, the Gary Common Council, the City of Gary will create a budget, and they will submit that budget toward the end of this year to the state, and the state will then, in response, determine how much can be levied, essentially. Is that what you're saying?
Well, I think the levy is right based on the land value and the assessed value, what's going on in that particular community. Gary's was 77 million, and I have some stuff here I can share with you. But their tax caps was 43 million.
Right. So when you apply the tax caps, you're only going to get
You
for
can
the city $43 million.
No.
What you're saying? What are you saying exactly?
yeah. Basically, it was 38.
38.
38.
38.
Mhm.
Then you have the collectible amount.
Mm-hmm.
On which you can collect on that amount of those amount of dollars. Gary historically has been about 60%, and I think last year was a little bit of surprise. Last year, and I think the year before maybe, it was at 80-85%
Which is-
collection rate.
Because I heard
And-
lower numbers in terms of the property tax collection.
No, well, it all depends on it all depends on how you calculate
Okay,
it. Because
okay.
you can look at it, and if you twist the numbers around and you add another column in there, then it's going to look like a 36.
That's the
Percent.
number I've heard. Right.
Okay, well, the
Okay.
reason it looks like 36 is because they add in the tax cap.
Oh, okay. Gotcha. So when you apply the tax
So
cap,
when you said 36% of the total levy,
right.
as opposed to not 36% of what you
Who's
can
paying,
collect,
right.
And I think so far this year, Gary has collected. Well, last year, looking at last year, was about 28 million.
Okay.
School City, I think that was one of the problems that got School City in problems in hot waters is because they levy was at 37 million. Their collectible amount was at 18 million.
It's a
It's
big gap.
what their budget
Yeah.
should have been 18 million.
Right.
You know, but they kept borrowing money up until the total levy amount.
Right.
And so every year you borrow 25 million. So now you owe $100 million.
Right.
So, yeah, that was a big problem. We know where that went.
Right. Let's talk about this. I know a lot of concern is when Miller experienced a huge spike before the recession and before that crisis in values, and this was before the tax caps were put in place, and people had massive tax bills. I'm sure you remember that era. Any thoughts on that? And I think that may be where some of the concern comes from when people start seeing the values.
Well,
creep up.
when you look at it, I looked at one. If you don't mind me
No,
sharing
go
this
ahead.
one,
Mhm.
I looked at one in Miller.
Mhm.
This house was $570,000. That was the value.
I think okay.
Okay, and if the caps weren't in place, and I think that's why people, they although we promoted against the caps,
Mm-hmm.
I think they said, oh, we only have to pay 1%, and so they went for it. But just in this particular case, right now, those taxes that are due on that particular property for annual taxes of $5,600. So they have like a $2,900 installment and a $3,000 installment. If the tax credits that the state and the county gives, and the tax cap was not in place, their gross tax liability would have been $27,000.
Wow. So without the tax caps and without basically the exemptions you're talking about?
The exemptions and the credit that the state and the county gives.
Right, it would be dramatically more.
Yes, and
And
that's what was happening before
The tax
caps
caps.
went into place.
And that's why people voted for the tax
Right.
cap. But the caps actually hurt the community.
Mm-hmm.
I mean,
Can you say more about that? I mean, I know that I'm in real estate, I understand it, and that people don't want to pay a lot of taxes, but the consequences of having 5,000 versus instead of 27,000, right, which is a pretty dramatic difference. What does that mean, and why were you all against?
well, we were against it because it hurts the city. I mean, the city is actually broke, and that's one of the reasons why.
Mhm.
Mr. Blumenberg was the assessor at that time, and we tried to get people to understand either you pay now or you pay later.
Mhm.
And so we're at the point that the city's broke.
Mhm.
And nobody wants to go back to paying more in taxes.
Right.
But you have your police and fire, you want to pay them a living wage. The city loses excellent police officers and firemen because they can go
Next door.
right, make more
Right.
money. So the school system, is crumbling. We have to find
A middle ground. some
right,
kind of place to-
absolutely. And if you look at those same properties that we're talking about now, and look at what they pay for taxes, just over in Chicago.
Mhm.
So
Or if you compare Ogden Dunes, or if you have a lakefront property in Ogden Dunes versus
absolutely.
Miller, it's a pretty dramatic
Yeah, it
Uh,
is.
difference. So I guess one other question I wanted to ask in that sort of arena is about the macro. We kind of covered it, the total number of tax dollars that come into the township. I keep wanting to say city, but come into the city and come into the township, and how those are apportioned. So one of the things I'm often told and often hear is that Miller is paying all the taxes, right? So Miller pays the majority of the taxes in the city, and the West Side and Glen Park
But
and other areas.
how does Miller know what they pay? Because it's 004. It's all of Gary.
Mhm.
When taxes are paid, it doesn't say this is in the Hilltop section of Gary, or this is for Terrytown, or this is for Edna. This
Right.
came from. That's not how it's done. It goes into the taxing district.
Mhm.
So
Now, if you looked at the assessed values, and of course, I guess you got residential investment and commercial, is there a way to know, in 46403 or in a particular zip code that, $20 million is coming from that zip code and so many other millions coming from another subsection?
Well, theoretically, I think you would have to, if you have more $500,000 houses
Mhm.
in a neighborhood, of course, they're probably paying more in taxes. But I understand the question, but the concept, I think, is misguided, because the concept is that we're all in this together, and it's supposed to be distributed equally amongst the whole community.
Mhm.
The same way the townships were developed and created in the first place, the whole township. That's so that depending on, you might have a little bit more needy over here and not over here, but the whole idea was to pool it together to create some demographics that would allow the finances to help each other,
Mhm.
as far as a community is concerned. So, yeah, probably, they probably have more high-end houses in Gary, in that particular area. Maybe not, because we have some on the west side as well.
And you have more
And-
commercial in
and-
other
and
areas
you
too.
have
more commercial.
Like
and-
Indiana Sugars and
That's
US Steel,
right.
the casino.
Right.
That's
All
right.
those 3% and 2% payers, some of the huge multifamily apartment buildings
Right.
that are in other areas. You might have a few $500,000, $1 million houses, but you have a big tax liability for some of those larger companies.
Yes.
Absolutely.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I printed one of those for you.
Oh, good,
That's it.
good, all right. I like to be equipped with information, so knowledge is power. We're trying to get knowledge today.
Absolutely.
Let me ask about U.S. Steel, since we mentioned them, and we kind of talked earlier about what it means to have less tax dollars, what happened after the tax caps. Can we say more about what U.S. Steel used to pay, or what they were assessed, and then what's happening now, and what are the consequences of that? And maybe not just U.S. Steel, but companies in
All
general.
of them. Well, there's the big four, they call it the big four that the state has taken over a lot of industrial properties. They took it under the premise that the assessors, the local assessors, was looking out for the interests of, the community, that they were fighting too hard against these companies. And every year for 40 years, U.S. Steel said they were moving out. They didn't want to deal with the assessors, and they didn't want to pay this much. And I think during that time that this office was really going against U.S. Steel, they were approved for a total sum about $200 million in abatements by the city council as well. So we were having some real difficulties with them. But at that time, the city budget, they differ from year to year, but in general, they were around $150 million a year.
So 150 million, you're talking about
Was
what
a
years?
budget.
What years?
This would have been back in the 90s.
So in the 90s,
maybe the 80s, 90s, in that period.
So roughly 150 million.
150 million was the city budget, if I remember correct.
Right. But now we're talking about closer to 38 or 43
right.
million dollars.
And at that time, U.S. Steel was paying about $70 million, about half of the budget.
A year.
A
So
year.
U.S. Steel is paying $70 million. Now they're paying.
Right now, they're at about, well, if you include, you would have two personal and real property. You'd be looking at somewhere between 12 and 14 million.
Wow. So that's like a 55 to 60 million dollar difference in what they're paying every year. So if you add that up over 10 years, we're talking about a substantial number of tax dollars that are no longer coming to the city.
Absolutely. Well, U.S. Steel can afford to pay lobbyists to lobby for them to not be good corporate citizens, and that's what they've done. But they're not the only one. As a matter of fact, I think the Ross Township assessor was telling me that South Lake Mall was assessed more than U.S. Steel.
Wow.
Yeah, because
they were.
Yeah, so you see how it's just completely shifted.
Right.
And then you have the casinos, both the same thing. They didn't want to pay. Yeah, everybody wants to be here, but nobody wants to pay.
Pay their fair share.
Absolutely.
I think U.S. Steel, you're talking about land value. U.S. Steel's average land value per acre is about $17,000 per acre on assessed value, whereas probably the lowest assessed value for commercial and other industrial properties outside of U.S. Steel that are not under the umbrella of the state, probably around $35,000 to $55,000 per acre assessed value.
It's a dramatic difference.
Yeah, but see, the assessors are
No control.
no control.
You said there were the four big ones. So you were talking about.
Oh, you had middle.
BP Amico,
Okay.
U.S. Steel,
was
ArcelorMittal, Middle, whatever the steel mill is out
which
there.
they combined.
And it was ISPET Inland at that
Okay.
time.
Gotcha. Let me just ask a question about the circuit breaker. So I've been hearing a lot about this, a variety of explanations, and the notion is that we're going to have less dollars coming in. This was based on the debt, I believe, that we had when the tax caps, please correct me if I'm saying this incorrectly, when the tax caps were implemented. But can you just talk about what the circuit breaker means?
The circuit breaker has a different significance because that's the circuit breaker is the 1%, 2%, and 3% cap. Those are the circuit breakers. But if your community has, say you decide that there's something that the voters vote a project or something that's going on, that is moved outside of the circuit breaker. So that is still added in. If you pick up a different project, that's still added in after the circuit breakers and stuff are in place. But the circuit breaker is basically the caps. And One of the things I printed out for you, this is a circuit breaker report from Lake County.
Mm-hmm.
And it shows you all of, this is over 65 circuit breaker. And then you had a 1, 2, 3 circuit breakers. And these are the amounts, and you know, of course, they go with the cities. This is Gary happened to be here, but this is it.
Mm-hmm. But there's a difference in the amount of dollars that are going to be apportioned to the township or to the city. That's what I've been hearing and reading some articles about. Based on, there was a certain number of years.
If they had debt,
They had debt.
Yeah, you know how if you have debt and like if the circuit breaker is 1, you might be at 1.5%
Mhm.
because of the debt, and once the debt is paid off, then you go back to the 1%. Yeah.
But the cities had so much time to pay off that debt, or if they did not, and I guess there was a forgiveness period that I had heard about, and that seems to be ending because they were wondering whether the governor would extend it, but it's tied to debt and the amount of dollars that come back to the city or the township.
It would have to be the
To
city.
the city,
Yeah.
right? Okay, I know that's been a conversation that's out there when we think about how many dollars we're going to have to work with. Just one final question, then I'll open it up for you all to offer remarks and thoughts in general about anything we talked about or something else you'd like folks to know in the city of Gary and in the 1st District and of course beyond as we talk about your assessed evaluation. Someone said they did not get a bill, and which I guess is a good and bad problem. Eventually it'll be a bad problem.
It'll be a bad one.
But they wanted to know what to do. She said, I paid my taxes last year, but I didn't get a bill this year. And when's the first installment due? Well, the due date is passed, but it's been extended
Yes.
until June the 11th, I believe.
Yes.
June 10th or 11th is when it's been extended to. But if you didn't get a bill,
Well, if you didn't get a bill, you can contact the treasurer's office. Ask for a duplicate. You can contact us. We'll print you up one if you want. But I would definitely contact the treasurer's office. Things have been a little bit out of whack because of COVID. A friend of mine who returned from Africa in January and it mailed a postcard while she was there. Her grandmother just got it yesterday, and that was in January.
wow.
Yeah, so things have been a little bit wacky, so I'm not sure. But we'll print one, or they can contact the treasurer's office. Yes.
Excellent. So I want to thank you all again and give you some
Thank you.
thank you for doing this. And if there's any closing remarks you have, things you'd like folks to know or about the office, about taxes or assessed valuation to be more specific, because the auditor's office
Calculates taxes.
calculates
Yes.
the taxes based on the assessed.
Based on the
Valuation.
assessed valuation, what I would want the citizens of Gary to know is that we are here Monday through Friday, 8:30 to 4:30, and we are public servants. We work for you. But in saying that, we work for everyone so that it's fair and equitable. If you feel that there's been a mistake made, please feel free to come into the office. Right now, we're only doing by appointments only, and you must wear a mask when you come in, but you can contact us by phone at 219-885-0555 or by email, and that would be Collij, that's COLLIJY @lakecountyIN.org. Our fax is 219-881-2625. We have been closed actually since March 23rd, and that was by order of the governor as well as through the commissioners for Lake County, because we are under Lake County government. We even came back to work early because most offices are not open, but we did come back. We are trying to get a jump on things. But in saying all that, I want everyone to be safe and be well. And like I said, if you have a problem, give us a call.
Thank you, Ed. Do you have any-
Well, I just want to kind of piggyback off of Ms. Collins here, but we do offer, and I really would like to stress to anybody's what we will work with you any way that we can Right now, under appeal, if you have property under appeal, we have teleconferences that we do where you don't have to come in. We use our emails. If you call any particular person, emails, faxes, we'll work with you in any way that we possibly can. So I encourage everyone, protect your rights. If you feel that your assessment is not correct, please appeal.
Yes.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Thank you.
that's
So,
important.
Absolutely. And just one quick, I was supposed to be at the end, but I do want to ask one thing. If you appeal your property taxes and as part of that process an appraiser is sent out and the value is actually higher than what it had been assessed, what happens?
And you're not appealing your property taxes.
I'm sorry, your assessed valuation. Let me get that right.
Assessed valuation.
Exactly.
Well, when you file an appeal, you open yourself up. So if it's higher, then that's how it is.
Then that will be your new
That
assessment.
is your new assessment.
I see.
Yeah.
So there is
But
somewhat of a risk.
there is a risk,
Okay.
yes. But I advise people to take that risk.
Mm-hmm.
And it doesn't stop with at our office, because when you file an appeal, this is the first level. If there's no agreement reached, then it goes to the county, to the Property Tax Board of Appeals. And if they side with us and you don't agree with them, you can still go further to the state tax board.
Mhm.
You know,
There's
so-
3 levels.
Well, it's
Oh,
actually more, because you can
more,
go all the way
the
go
courts,
to, you're right,
right?
absolutely. Yeah, but I tell everyone, protect your rights,
Right.
you know, and sometimes it's worked out for the good of the taxpayer, and sometimes it's worked out for the good of the county.
Well, thank you all. Certainly, we hope this has been informative. We will do more of these with other folks in local government, and if we need to do this again for a round 2 later on, we can take a deeper dive. I'm certainly grateful for our Calumet Township Assessor, Ms. Jacqueline Collins, as well as her Chief Deputy, Mr. Ed Golson, who are a wealth of knowledge. If there's any additional information, handouts, I can make those available to you. Thank you for tuning in to learn about your assessed valuation. Have a good evening.